We are now moving into the panel discussion, so please rejoin the podium. Sverre Alvik, Carolyn Fischer, Edina Wickholm, and Akiko Shimada. We are having questions from the audience, quite a few of them. Thank you so much, and I'll try to convey a couple of them. But I also know that we have an expert panel, which is very eager to participate as well. So, yeah, I didn't forget anything there. Nice to see you all again. I'm going to start with one question that has been trending since this morning, and I'm looking at you, Sverre, first, since you were presenting the energy outlook and showing the status of the transition. Why, and maybe you might find this question a little bit biased, but we'll see. Why aren't Western countries standing up against the US hegemony and military complex that has created an energy security crisis and renewable energy slowdown? And when I say bias, it's maybe the last thing, because we are seeing that there is an energy transition going on, but it's not fast enough. So why aren't we
standing up towards the US-led slowdown in the transition? Is that the question?
Well, the US hegemony and military complex that has created an energy security crisis, and so that's the result, basically, of the military actions.
I think governments all over the world, they have multiple priorities, and unfortunately the climate change is not on top of the Maslow's pyramid. I think next to sort of water and air and other things that we need every day, then security is prominent on that list. And when there is a threat towards or national or personal security, that takes the focus, and it takes the focus often away from the long-term problem. And it's one of the tragedy of commons for climate change is that it's long-term. It's not urgent. You cannot control it yourself. You need help from a global dugnad, community work, in order to make that happen. And that is probably the main reason why that is suffering when you have more short-term immediate crises like the security crisis we now see.
So everyone for him or herself. Because the question is, why are we not standing up?
I think because other priorities or other issues take priority, and they are perceived more urgent. And climate is often suffering in these issues.
Yeah. And speaking of climate, Carolyn, I think you might be able to answer this question also from the audience. Climate change imposes disproportionate costs on the global south. How can the current focus on local energy security avoid deepening north-south polarization?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure how the renewable energy sort of factors in. I think it's more likely to help coordinate rather than deepen polarization. I'm not sure I get that aspect of the question, but I certainly agree with the evidence that the greater disproportionate burden of actual climate change is falling on developing countries, and that we collectively have a responsibility to help them navigate that. I mean, developing economies are having to navigate multiple transitions. Like, first of all, they need to grow, they need to develop. Second of all, they need to, we're all navigating a digital transition as well. And developing economies, people need more digital access still, as well as these, rapidly changing technological landscapes that are also shaping energy landscapes too. And then there's also the energy transition to navigate. So there's a kind of like a vast array of investments that need to be made, and with some assistance. But I think, fortunately, a lot of those investments are compatible. Growing clean, so using investment in clean energy access to promote development, to enable more digital access to. So I think that actually a lot of what needs to be done is self-reinforcing. And more the worry is I think that these sort of short-term distractions and changes in priorities are diverting resources from the finance and assistance that developing countries need to participate more fully in the global economy. That would be to the benefit of everyone.
Thank you. Now I'm going to turn to the expert panel, and we have a couple of modelers who would like to ask questions. I think I'm going to ask Jay Edmonds first from Battelle to convey your comments or question maybe to the panel, Jay.
I have a question for the panel. So we've heard a lot today from some great speakers, and it indicates that we're moving into a non-cooperative world where international trade is a weapon of coercion or war. And so supply chains now carry risks of disruption that they didn't carry a decade ago. And international trade in components carry a Trojan horse cybersecurity risk. And this sort of implies a premium on secure onshore production. So with that setup, how will that reshape the energy transition, or will it?
Who are you specifically looking at?
Carolyn may have thought about this, but the panel's got a lot of knowledge. So.
I think there's a tension between, in certain countries are looking towards like reshoring. Others are considering friendshoring. So the question, ultimately the question is, you want resilient supply chains. It's not that you have to make everything at home, but you want resilient supply chains. So some of that may be diversifying suppliers, and there are more and more growing economies that are able to supply certain components outside of China, although it's often Chinese companies that may be investing in those, but there is some building out of more diversity in supply chains. I know we're looking for in the critical minerals aspect. There are a lot of other countries, like African countries, that have a good deal of these resources that would, be excited to contribute to these value chains. But that takes time to develop. So I think there are opportunities here, but also I think there's also a role for diplomacy and cooperation, I think, to contribute to resilience. So if we can pull back from a bad equilibrium I guess I would like to hear also from other panelists, like how long do we expect this period to endure? Is this a permanent change in events, or a short-term thing? Because ultimately expectations are what matter for the transition. So do we believe that people are staying committed? Do we believe in these are investments in very long-lived, durable assets. So it's not just what's happening today; it's our expectations about what's going to be around in the future.
We also have to endure disruptions along the way. Sverre, and then Edina.
Energy dominance means one thing in US and another thing in China, and so where you stand depends on where you sit. And we are seeing after 30 years of an unnormal peaceful period, I think we are more back to to the normal unrest that we had during the Cold War and also before that. And diversification is obviously one very important element in this, in addition to being more distributed. And rooftop solar, for example, is an example of how things grow even closer to home in order to be more resilient. And we will probably see that in a more complex or conflict-driven world, we are driving home closer to ourselves, and that then the overall pace is suffering as a consequence of that.
Mm. And it's not good for cooperation either.
No, and the lack of cooperation is not good for the overall pace.
Edina?
Yeah, it's a dilemma that when you face a challenge that has really only one solution, and then that solution is cooperation on a global scale. And at the same time, you're in a time where that trust and that cooperation is being ripped apart every day. It's difficult. When it comes to the energy transition, I would say from the industry, in order for me to make, or not me, in order for me to try to make my board approve an investment decision in a decarbonization project, I will need to make them believe that it makes financial sense. It doesn't, not next year, but in the long run. And then
how long a run?
Depends how big the investment is.
Okay.
but what we need is, and what I'm really worried about now, we need to trust that, for instance, the politicians in Brussels and in Norway are able to maintain a grid or a framework that actually penalizes emissions and encourages decarbonization. When that trust starts to falter, we're going to be in a lot of trouble, because these projects don't make business sense, not at all. But they do make sense if you are moving towards a penalization of emissions. So when Equinor said that industry doesn't want EU ETS, I am representing the largest gas consumer in Europe. We want EU ETS, and we also said that in Antwerp. So, yeah, sorry that Irene wasn't here now, but I told her as well.
Good. Well, thank you for making that point. We're moving on. Volker Krey, looking at you now. Integrated models and analysis from IASA, which is the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, and a regular on the expert panel. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Very interesting discussion. I wanted to come in on the critical minerals as well as on the embodied emissions. And we've heard, like, on the critical mineral side, recycling is one way of possibly increasing or decreasing reliance on imports. The embodied emissions are another aspect in my view, and both have in common that they are associated with assets, and many of these assets are actually, I would argue, very poorly utilized. I mean, the key example being cars. Most of them are parked 23 hours a day, and so I'm wondering, are we missing something if we just look at recycling on the one end and reducing consumption, which may have well-being implications? We could basically look at alternative ways of providing the same service, just in a way, more efficient way, by sharing or by utilizing vehicles more frequently. It requires looking at other options. So most of us are interested in mobility as a service, not per se at owning a vehicle.
Oh, you shouldn't say that in Norway.
Yeah, just wanted to throw this in as an additional dimension. Was wondering to which degree, yeah, you are also looking into these options that may have a much bigger lever compared to just recycling or sitting at home.
Are you looking at Anna Maria particularly for that?
For example.
Well, I just want to say that circular economy is not about recycling. is about keeping materials and products as much as possible in the life cycle. So definitely reusing, repairing, and not just discarding products. This is how we should go. But of course, in the end, and also during the life cycle, there is always leakages, thermodynamic law, right? So we should be able to utilize all kinds of resources, especially because we have a great dependency for that. So this is one thing. I mean, it's not about recycling, it's about reusing, reutilizing, having things much longer in the life cycle than maybe we do per today, actually. So this is one thing. Another thing that I wanted to signalize is that recycling raw materials industries are largely they're high energy consumers as well. It's a huge energy consumption, and is also related to what you just said. One has to have a positive business case as well to have the whole business. Unfortunately, it is how it is.
Which requires a market.
Which requires a market as
Which
well.
isn't
In the
necessary.
end, is the end product market price that drives the whole business case. Energy included there, so it's a subject that has quite many complicated points.
You wanted to comment?
Sharing economy, which is part of this, is one of the behavioral changes which we see very little of. And our experience is that the sharing or behavioral change needs to be enforced through policies, because if it comes through my own or your own initiative, it rarely happens. So that's a lot of responsibility on the politicians in order to make these behavioral changes needed in order to utilize materials and other things better to happen.
And I was just wondering, for the two industrial representatives in the panel, how are you approaching the circular economy in your own businesses? Would you like to start, Akiko? Because, I mean, you're involved in many different types of materials and
yes,
and
so we are
different value
certainly we have been trying to include circular economy into our portfolio, as well as, for instance, in terms of the recycling. So we are looking into very much battery recycling as well. It's not just a recent thing. We have coming from Japan. Japan has experienced already the sudden halt supply from China over 10 years ago. So there was and then the government stepped in and provided policy-backed support to deal with that. That was recycling. And also diversification. So not only focusing getting one material from the one country, but some other countries as well. And also reserve as well. So so those are okay. It's not corporate side. Corporate side it's circularity, recycling. It's very much embedded in our business model. Whether we can do it now or not in timing, it might take some time. Because it needs to be also business viable as well. But we are very much looking into also having those experiences in the past in a kind of a global perspective as well.
Thank you. Did you want to add anything there, Edina? Or
Yeah, for us, I mean, circularity, we have something we call the nitrogen use efficiency. So how that's really the golden goose when it comes to fertilizer. You want to use everything. It's a bit different there because you don't want to have a lot that is not absorbed in the soil and used in the plant. So it's more about getting that efficiency just right.
Yeah.
Not too much, not too little.
Thank you. I'm going to move further on into the expert panel. And since we were talking about behavioral change, I thought it was logical to turn to you, Christian Klöckner, who you are a professor in environmental psychology. So psychology is your field, and you are affiliated with NTNU. So what did you want to ask the panel about?
Well, what did I want to ask? First of all, I want to say that I've been following this conference now for a couple of years, and I have to say there have been editions where I was more optimistic, hearing to what has been presented than this year. But that leads to my question, and the question is, when we see all the big decisions we have to make as societies. Where whatever we do, it has trade-offs. So there will be economic consequences. Some will benefit, some will pay. There will be social benefits and losses in whatever we decide. There will be ecological consequences for whatever we do. We've been discussing a lot about resilience this morning, but making the energy system resilient will have these ecological consequences. If we do a lot of surveillance in the oceans, it interferes with marine biosystems. So how do we make these decisions? And who's making these decisions? How do we make sure that what we decide is actually reliable for more than a 5 years cycle until the next election? How do we do this within democratic systems? And I don't really have an answer, so I would like
And you expect these to have an answer?
Yes.
Okay.
No, I would like to hear your reflections, because I think that we have so many different crises, and for me, like a democracy crisis is part of the whole thing. And like these crises that we talked about today, they put the way our societies work under pressure as well. So how do we deal with it without losing also the trust that we've talked about earlier, which is something that the Nordic countries still have, and so on.
Yeah, and maybe also avoiding doing it at the cost of other nations, other parts of the world.
Yes, and not discussing in 30 years, not with me, obviously, but with other people, why we ended up in a similar bad situation as we are now, just in a different sector.
And now we're actually entering the social dimensions in many ways that I know that some of the audience have been asking, where are the social dimensions in this particular session and this panel? And I'm kind of looking at you, Carolyn, you know, with your experience from the World Bank and also working with economies that are developing. What do you think about Christian's question? How are we dealing with all these different and difficult types of decisions that we have to make on behalf of ourselves, but also future generations?
I think for a lot of developing economies, they're on the receiving end of these global fluctuations and are having to navigate that, but it's on top of sort of like fundamental development challenges. I think a lot of the world still hasn't fully recovered from COVID. Maybe from the virus, but not from the economic shocks of COVID, and so we're in a slower growth period. Now there's added uncertainty. In terms of decision making, though, I don't know how much that changes sort of the trade-offs in terms of looking ahead. It may slow down the growth and development and investment, but I don't think it changes the trade-offs and the need to invest in clean energy. A lot of developing countries have really terrible like air pollution burdens. There's a lot of reasons why they want to transition to cleaner energy sources. They also need to build out a lot of infrastructure anyway. So there's a lot of focus on trying to get the price signals right to reduce phase out fossil fuel subsidies. Even I think more and more countries are realizing they can't afford that anymore. So we're getting moving towards some better alignment of prices that helps incentives, but we also need investments in public transportation, in the kinds of infrastructure that allow people to make the behavioral choices away from more emitting energy uses. And so you have, you know, that whole set of challenges in developing economies.
Sverre, you wanted to comment on this and just to add a question to it.
Yeah.
Who is running the evolution? Markets, policies,
Yeah,
consumers?
ultimately decisions are taken by politicians, and behind them again, in democracies, there are voters. And what we want is
If they are voting and using them.
if they are voting.
Yeah.
And what we want is the decision makers to take as informed decisions as possible. And that's where, I mean, NTNU, academia, educational institutions, etc., are so important. And at risk we see in many countries today. So that's the first thing that should happen is obviously to advance research and help people taking informed and as good decisions as possible. And then if you are to compare sort of nature with climate, with poverty and other things, you need to try to put up metrics on this, and the SDGs themselves are a good example of how difficult that is. And even behind that was sort of a notion of growth, which is impossible if you want to at the same time preserve. So there are dilemmas here, but at least you should let the decision makers be as informed as possible on this. And we as voters has a tendency to vote with our wallets, and then we might probably have brave politicians that remove some of that bias into some more long term, and we have the opportunity to do that, and it's a challenge to politicians to be braver in forcing us to
And to
vote
think
that
longer
way.
than the next election.
Yes.
Yeah. Edina and then Anna Maria.
Yeah. I think like maybe one of the most important battles aren't in Iran or even Ukraine, but it's the battle about what is true, what is actual facts. Because in order to make those informed decisions, you need to know what the facts are. And I was talking about we need to trust the politicians, a bit like Sverre was saying, but we also need politicians that trust the voters, that don't pretend that like a few years ago, it was the energy transition. It's a win-win. You get better cars and they're electrical. That was true for the start. We are not there anymore. The next steps are expensive. They will get us to a better place, but it will be a bumpy ride. And I think we need to be honest with voters, with people, that is the way it's looking. But the consequences of not doing that transition
Is even worse.
It's worse, and it's worse for my kids. I mean, I can endure a lot if I know that I'm buying my kids a better future. And I think we need politicians to be blunt, be bold, be honest, and trust the voters. Even if it's complex questions, then let's try to get better educated together.
Thank you. Anna Maria.
Yes, very quick. Of course, trust is the key, but it's also social acceptance. It's very important, and social awareness. We know, all of us here, maybe about the importance of the energy transition, the importance of availability of raw materials, recycling. Does the people in the streets know about it? So they have to get informed. They have to get involved in decisions as well. And here I'm talking directly on, not in my backyard, in the case of minerals. And in the case of energy, renewable, we don't want to have wind turbines. So it's about involving the society and trying to raise awareness towards the problem, towards that we can also have the solution for the problem. We are talking lately about the potential of Norway being a provider of rare earths for the whole Europe. And there is a lot of efforts in the defense mineral deposit, and the Nome Kommune is very much involved in the decisions that are taken. The society is very much listened. They have a lot of contact, a very close contact with the society. They are informed. They are involved in decisions. So this is the key. And behind that, it's a political trust. In countries like Serbia, for example, where lithium deposits were about to be open, there's no trust in politicians. People are just showing up in the streets daily because they don't trust. They think that, yeah, you open this lithium because you want to get economical benefit. So trust is important, and social awareness and involvement is important here.
I think we have to stop there, actually. I'm afraid our time is running out once again, but thank you so much for a very nice discussion and dialogue session, also with the expert panel and the audience questions. Yeah, I had so many more questions I would like to ask you, and I know that you would have been more than capable of replying to them as well, but let's give the nice panel a good round of applause. Now,